Welcome to the Orthocast. Today we have our guest Tristan Haggard, formerly known as Primal Health, brother of Chase Haggard. If you don't know Tristan, he can be described as a diet guru, a philosopher, an Orthodox Christian, an anti-vegan and anti-big soy advocate, a chalk enthusiast. Now, if you haven't seen his videos before, you can find him on YouTube, you can find him on Rockfin and Telegram, but I'm sure most of you already know him. Now, what I really like about Tristan is he sees the bigger picture. Holistic thinking of like seeing what's happening on the micro scale and also like seeing what's going on, with the global agenda and tying these all in together. If you haven't seen his videos, he has really good thumbnails. He has really good montages. They're really good videos. Go check it out. And there's a lot of good topics I want to cover today. But first, I want to cover, Tristan, what was your journey to Orthodoxy? Chase said you kind of grew up in a house. It was kind of secular. You kind of prayed every once in a while. But what was your journey to Orthodoxy?
Yeah, cool. Well, just throwing this out there, that guy Chase, I've never met this guy in my life. It's kind of weird. He's out there pretending to be my brother, telling everybody he's my brother, but just I don't really know who this guy is. No, I'm joking. Yeah, I grew up in a basically like an atheist household. We had parents who would give a little bit of lip service every once in a while to the idea of God, but it was usually kind of a taboo subject, right? Like actually getting into like, well, what does that mean? Was never really something that they seemed to feel comfortable with. So yeah, I mean, our parents they were they're kind of, I think my dad's like the last year of the baby boomer generation. So they're the tail end they're like the last true boomers. And I mean they grew up enmeshed in total psyop culture and
Yeah.
Disney and television and everything. So it's hard to blame an entire generation, but it's all their fault. No, but we didn't really have any set beliefs beyond just kind of like a general pragmatic, well, you should be a good person. You should be functional in society, right? And I mean, I remember my dad, our dad would instill virtues, right? He was definitely a virtuous person who did his best to be good and did his best to kind of instill a sense of duty in his children to be good. But I'd say that like maybe underlying those reasons was kind of just like almost like the standard American boomer civic religion, where it's just like, well, you should just don't be a piece of trash because you'll cause problems at school or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just like I don't want to hear from your principal again because I'm sick of hearing from your principal, and it's like it was kind of just a pragmatic be good because you got to get along in the
Yeah.
world.
Just be a good
And to
person.
me, yeah. Just be a good person. Well, what's that mean? So does that mean just go along with the mass culture? Does that mean just go along to get along? It does seem like it kind of is that way for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was basically an atheist household. I had some neighbors who were a lot of our neighbors went to like megachurch, Southern California megachurch called Harvest. It's Greg Laurie. You know about Greg Laurie, Harvest, the Harvest Crusade, and all that stuff that they do.
No. How bad? How bad is it?
Well, it's not as cringe as a lot of stuff, but it's
Okay.
it's kind of bad as in like the level of popularity and the economic behemoth that it's become. I mean, they fill Angel Stadium every year
Oh
and
wow.
have all the like, yeah, they just got all the different I don't know, Hillsong type music and Greg Laurie, he's I guess he calls himself a pastor, minister, I don't know, but they don't do they have no baptism. They have, a
Wow.
very loose definition of what it is to be Christian. I mean, to
Yeah.
them, like the Eucharist is basically the moment when the audience is at peak emotional fragility and feeling completely, enraptured by all the music and the sermon, and then they decide to stand up and give their lives to Jesus again. But it's a very vague,
Yeah.
definition of who Christ is,
Hmm.
and to me, it never really resonated much beyond some glimpses of emotional states that were highly contextually dependent, right? Like I would go to the Harvest Crusade every once in a while just with my friends because their families would make this pilgrimage to you go to Angel Stadium, everybody, you drink your sodas, you buy they'd always be selling Remember the Left Behind series? The Left Behind series were always being sold outside of the stadium. So it was they had some a lot of the people there did have some sort of like beliefs in the rapture and some of this
Wow.
maybe slightly Pentecostal type stuff, but it wasn't like they were speaking in tongues or anything like that. Um,
That's
so anyways,
great.
yeah, we would go to these every once in
Yeah.
a while, and to me it never really I don't know, it just didn't really hit home. I remember we had a
Yeah.
Bible study across the street at a friend's house, and they were a great family. Like they homeschooled their kids, and I mean they couldn't watch Disney movies. They didn't watch Disney movies. I always thought that was really weird. Like, why is that?
Yeah.
Why can't Scotty and his friends or and his brothers and sisters watch Disney movies? I always thought it was kind of silly. Like, oh, that's too much. I think my parents thought it was ridiculous too. But man, looking back, it's like, yeah, no way am I showing my
They're
kids these.
vindicated.
Exact, totally vindicated. Homeschool neighbors, Carol and I think Scott was the dad as well, and they're completely vindicated in my eyes. Um, but so that was kind of my exposure is like going to Bible study at the neighbor's house every once in a while. But I would just go because of the social. I want to hang out with my
Yeah.
friends, right?
Hmm.
Like, oh, there would be some girls there, and we could try to like flirt with girls, or like you run around and play before, and you get to hang out past when the street lights are out. So that's why I
Yeah.
would go. But I remember asking questions and getting really insufficient answers.
Oh, okay.
Kind of talking about. I remember the kids would break off. Everyone would sing guitar songs, which was, it was kind of nice. Like everyone sung together. It was kind of modern guitar songs. And after that, the kids would go to a separate Bible study, and the adults would do whatever it was they did. And the kids' Bible study was always a little cringe. Like I'd ask
Yeah.
questions that weren't that hard. Um, I remember asking. This guy was talking about how, well, yeah, we should know alcohol's bad. And my parents liked to drink some wine. I'd never seen them drunk at that time. There's like they were, degenerates or something. But I'm just
Yeah.
like, wait, so you're saying my parents shouldn't drink wine? How come Jesus turns water into wine?
Hmm.
And the guy goes, well, back then it was really different. The wine was more like grape juice. It was more like grape juice.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
what's funny? It's actually the complete opposite. At least a lot of scholars into what it was like in the Hellenic world at the time. Wine would never have been as weak as like a Chardonnay is these days. So it's
Yeah.
like these answers that I was getting were just insufficient to me, and it seemed like theologically it didn't click. So I kind of maybe went down a more not exactly materialist, but definitely a secular worldview of like, oh, maybe God's real, maybe there isn't a God, and if God exists, it can't be a he, it must be an it. Then like it's like
Yeah.
maybe the universe kind of works through everything, and
Hmm.
so I did some research on some Eastern religions and stuff, and in high school
Oh, in
definitely
high
started
school.
getting it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, later on in high school, definitely got
Yeah.
into more like Eastern religion, and I just jumped like 10 years. But yeah, high school, Eastern religion, and uh, started getting into like smoking pot, and
Yeah.
so I was poking the smot, and then I was like doing you get in like tried mushrooms,
Yeah.
and there was kind of that draw of that world was real strong for me, right? Because I was a real curious person, and I always liked to. I don't know. I mean, I wanted to experience things that were intense and novel, and so yeah, having trying mushrooms, and then getting into I got into Terrence McKenna in like
Oh.
university. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Terrence McKenna and the mushrooms. I listened to hours and hours of Terrence McKenna exacerbatingly and masturbatorily speaking in his lispy, effeminate whispers about the machine elves. So, I got into a lot of that stuff when I was about 18, 19. Now I look back and I'm just like, oh, it's so stupid, right? But
Yeah.
Alan Watts. I was really into
Yeah.
reading Alan Watts, and I
Oh,
remember reading his
wow.
Nature, Man, and Woman book, and then started getting into like studying the I don't know, just kind of various Eastern religions, a little bit of occultism, Western occultism started becoming interesting to me, and that just led me to dead ends, nothing but dead
Yeah.
ends, and surrounding myself with people who were experimenting with psychedelics, mushrooms, LSD, and DMT, and all this stuff was I mean, at the time I thought like, oh yeah, we're like psychonauts, we're so cool, we're just we're exploring the outer reaches of consciousness, and we're so brave and stunning. But now I look back and it's just like that was so dumb. You're playing with fire. Because I mean,
Yeah.
I saw people get messed up by
Hmm.
drugs. Like I saw people get really delusional. So myself at times, just completely, when you're high and when you're on, mushrooms or acid, you really feel like you hear that there's that classic, like the scene in Almost Famous where the rock star is like he's on the roof and he's like, I'm a golden god. You
Yeah.
you get you get trips like that where you
Hmm.
really you feel like you're just untouchable. This total delusion state where you think that you're the smartest person, you think
Yeah.
the most intelligent person around,
And you're
and that
communing
these
with,
thoughts,
yeah, communing with demons too. Like you just
yeah.
you're kind of like tuning to this like channel and then just like letting anything like these machine elves, whatever it is. But so how did you like get out of that? Did you kind of like hit like a rock bottom or anything, or like when did you start to consider Christianity after? Because I know like Sarah from Rose kind of had like a similar experience, like kind of diving into the Eastern religions and everything. So what was your journey after that?
It's kind of, yeah, I like that. The term rock bottom is
Yeah,
something that comes to mind. Like I've never thought of it like this before. It's almost like a rock top, where it's like you
yeah,
hit this ceiling,
uh-huh,
where it's like you think you're doing great. You
yeah,
think that all your thoughts are the most brilliant thoughts that have ever been encountered by a human being, and it's all just delusion.
hmm,
And I think it was just realizing, wow, I'm just hit this wall, and where do I go from here? What am I going to do with myself? Oh
yeah,
yeah, I know how to feel really good, right? With chemical assistance, with surrounding myself with certain aesthetic things. But it was like I just realized the end of the line of hedonism is kind of just madness, or it's like madness and delusion, or you're gonna hurt yourself and other
yeah,
people. And I just kind of
hmm,
saw a lot of other people around me in that scene, just I don't know, just delusional and selfish and hedonistic. And it was like this is useless. So
yeah,
I mean, I had certain experiences that made me, even during that period, I did come to the conclusion that it's undeniable not only that there's like higher powers, but ultimately God. So I had come
yeah,
to the conclusion that God was real just through experiential um, things of like rock bottom or rock top, whatever you want to call it,
yeah,
of just those um, of a lot of experiences in my life. So I was kind of at the end of my university days, near the end of my university days, and I I had one experience that really stuck out. I'm not going to get into the details of it right now because it
hmm,
very well could have been. I mean, I very well could have been demonic.
hmm,
I wasn't in the influence of any psychedelics at the time, but I had kind of an experience with some sort of a spiritual being that led me to the conclusion that it is undeniably real, that there is so much more going on, right,
yeah,
than just physical matter.
hmm,
And also like a lot of the occult stuff that I had been looking into, these like ritual magic. It's not like I didn't get involved in ritual magic, but I was reading about Crowley, and I read a
oh
little bit of
wow,
Crowley stuff from, yeah, I mean, I had this job, and this weirdo guy at the hotel that I worked at, he was reading Crowley, and I was like, oh man, because I'd learned about a lot of conspiracy stuff too, so I knew
yeah,
that Crowley was this kind of demonic figure. And
yeah,
he was like, oh no, you should read him, he's really cool, man, it's all about love. It's just like, okay. So I had like read some of that. It's just like, this, yeah, that makes sense that this stuff is going on. I didn't like Crowley ever. I always
yeah,
kind of saw him as a wicked character. So anyways, I,
hmm,
I had certain experiences that led me to think, that
yeah,
led me to know that there is a higher power,
hmm,
and that there's a God, there's a personal God. And so yeah, I mean, basically just at the end of the line with psychedelics and with that whole scene, I this was around 2008,
okay,
or I think 2007, 2008, with remember the Obama election was happening.
hmm.
I think you were like 4. No, I'm kidding. How old are you?
Well, I was born in 2000, so I was like 7 or 8.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Yeah. So 2008 was the Obama election,
yeah,
and I'm in like the middle of, I think I'm finishing up university. I think I graduated in 2009. And I lived in Santa Cruz, California, which is one of the most liberal places
Oh,
in California.
nice. Very.
Yeah, very liberal area,
Very
and
demonic too,
people.
like a lot of demonic.
Yeah,
There's like the
yeah. Have you
whole.
been there?
No, but I know that isn't there like there's like a mystery spot or something there where there's like, have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like
Yeah,
weird
yeah, that's
stuff.
outside. Yeah, and they have these magnetic anomalies there.
Yeah.
They call it the mystery spot.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, Santa Cruz, it's actually a haven for like, witchcraft, and there are a lot of Wicca and witchcraft stores all around, and just tons of people into the new age. I haven't thought about this in a while. I'm sorry if I'm like kind of jumbled
Oh
because,
no, you're doing good.
I started talking about this and it brings up so many
Yeah,
memories, and
yeah,
I'm paraphrasing, I'm like, this is a distilled version.
yeah,
There's a lot of
yeah.
confusing alleyways I'm sure I
Uh-huh.
went down in my late teens, early 20s. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I lived in Santa Cruz. The Obama election
Mhm.
happens, and everyone's highly politicized. I never really enjoyed the hyper liberal worldview,
Mhm.
and I had you had to take courses if you're in the humanities department. I studied history in university, so if you're in the
Okay.
humanities department, you're gonna have to take courses in various different areas of the humanities, social sciences or whatever. And I remember some like feminist. It was called women's studies at the time,
Yeah.
now, and then it was gender studies, and then I don't know what it is now. So they had to keep changing the name of all the departments.
Yeah.
But this was like right when all this stuff was really starting to brew, and it was about to just explode into the mainstream. So it was kind of like being at the University of California, Santa Cruz is kind of like living around all the Twitter mods,
Oh
back in
God.
2008. Like
Oh no.
all these like purple-haired lesbians who became Twitter mods a few years
Yeah.
later, were probably in these courses with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd been fed up with that stuff, and
Hmm.
I was kind of leaning towards like Ron Paul libertarianism
Hmm.
at the
Oh yeah.
time politically, and was really actually very much emotionally attached to the idea of kind of a resurgence of libertarianism, and we got to
Hmm.
get rid of all this unconstitutional madness that's going on in
Yeah.
America, and if we can just restore constitutionality,
And the
we'll have
Fed.
this great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dude, and the Fed and all this. It's like, it's delusional. I don't think there's a political solution. So, anyways, yeah, Obama gets elected, and there's parades in the streets where we live, and people are crying in the streets, and it's like giant party, and this is crazy. This is like demonic.
Yeah.
And so I think and then other conspiracy research that I was doing at the time, I'd always been interested in kind of strange things. Like when I was a kid, I used to seek out books on Bigfoot and
Uh,
cryptozoology and UFOs and all
uh,
the. I was obsessed with that stuff as a kid. So those are basically gateways to the occult.
yeah.
um, the mainstream doorway into studying the occult is like, the UFO phenomenon. So,
Yeah.
anyways, I started learning a little bit more about some of these strange claims that people were making about, mind control, and uh, researched. I'd done a lot of research on social movements in the past, but then
Okay.
like putting these movements together, that's just at the university, right? Like I was really interested in what happened in the 60s. Like what was that? This kind of
Yeah.
revolutionary fervor. Um, and I was trying to put the pieces together historically, and was never really able to fully grasp it at that time. I didn't have like a holistic worldview that would give meaning to these occurrences and events in like our recent history.
Yeah.
And so I'd studied, the Nazi Germany, and like I was really interested in propaganda. I was always very skeptical of mass propaganda and stuff like that. And I started researching like these like what's it called, ritual abuse and stuff like
Oh,
that. Like
okay.
this led me to like learning about ritual abuse, satanic ritual abuse, and mind control. I read like Kathy O'Brien's book, Bryce Taylor's book, and all these like really weird, crazy claims some of these people were making, but they did kind of add up as and make a lot of sense in the research I'd done into psychology, because I'd started wanting to be a when I started out of university, I wanted to be a psychology major.
Hmm.
Then I realized that I didn't want to be a psychology major, and that I
Yeah.
was completely disgusted by what they were teaching in psychology departments. So,
Oh yeah.
learning about like all this stuff really kind of broke me in certain ways. Like I was just like, reading a lot of really dark stuff about these, survivors of ritual abuse, and it just I don't know, I reached a point where it was like, this is so cruel, this is so evil.
Mm.
I met people in like I met people in real life that had weird experiences that seemed to, fit into this picture as well. And long story short, it came to a point where I had to recognize that, yeah, there's a higher power, which I'd already kind of come to acknowledge begrudgingly. And I acknowledge that that higher power wasn't me, although at the time I still probably probably that was still sticking, deep in my soul, a lot of that
Yeah.
darkness.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just realized like there's evil, there's kind
Yeah.
of like staring into the abyss, and the abyss stares back, like Nietzsche talked about. And I
Hmm.
and I recognize there is evil, and that nihilism and all this stuff was not the answer. And make your own reality, bro. Make your own, create
Yeah.
your own story, and be the hero of your own story. All this stupid self-help stuff that I've been absorbing since I was in high school, that always just seemed to lead me to be more depressed
Yeah.
and never
I,
led to any real good action.
yeah. I kind of dove into nihilism too, and it led me to like really just bad like depression and just it was very hard to get out of that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so you start to like realize God is real and that you saw evil. That was similar with me, like seeing a lot of the evil that was going on in the world, and I'm like, there has to
Yeah, I could
be.
have just said that and
Yeah.
saved, 20 minutes. I'm sorry.
No, no, it was
Saw God was
interesting.
real, then experienced extreme evil, both outside and then feeling the draw of it in
Yeah.
myself, right? Feeling that temptation. Because
Hmm.
you start to like see the evil in the world and you're like, oh, do I join it? Oh,
Yeah.
what if I throw in my chips with this? Like maybe I can get a nice piece of the pie, right?
Yeah.
All this stuff that's happening, all this consolidation of power. Well, why not just climb the chain of command?
Hmm.
That was kind of where I was at, and it was like this Faustian bargain that was being offered almost of like, hey, join the world, right? You see
Yeah.
what's going on here. You can use this to your advantage,
Yeah.
right? And then, but it's like, well, wait a minute. No, this is all empty. I see the results of this, and it's, I
Yeah.
wasn't able uh, to go there. But I remember like the nihilism thing was hard
It's hard to
to
shake. Yeah.
it's super hard. I
Hmm.
mean, I remember when I was my first year in university, a close friend of mine introduced me to Nietzsche, and we were reading, Beyond Good and Evil and Thus Spake Zarathustra, and like hardly understanding Thus Spake Zarathustra, but like the gay science and Beyond Good and Evil. I remember reading these. I don't think I ever read any of those books in their entirety, but I definitely took chunks of it and was like, oh yeah, like this is awesome. This is me. That's
Yeah.
literally me. I'm like Superman. I'm so much cooler than the world. The
Yeah.
world, they're a bunch of muggles, but I'm like super smart. It was just,
Yeah.
no, I was an idiot,
Yeah.
and that inflated sense of self-importance always, it would just always, eventually it would pop. And I would
Mhm.
just realize, no, I'm like,
Yeah.
completely,
And
you
then
crashed.
and then the emptiness, like it's just always feeling empty. So like when did you start to like consider Christianity again? Was this in college or after college that you
Yeah,
started
it
to
was like the end of college, and it was just
Okay.
kind of, I'd had certain experiences before that had to do with, I'd read the book of Genesis, and then I had like certain spiritual experiences that were very unexplainable. And of course, I'd try to tell my friends all about it and stuff when I definitely, kind of maybe should have kept that to myself. And
Yeah.
so I'd had certain spiritual experiences that had to do with actually with the scriptures.
Hmm.
And I had taken a course on Genesis, and
Oh,
I actually, no, no, it was interesting, but
yeah.
they were teaching the documentary hypothesis, right? The what is it, JEDP hypothesis, where there's multiple authors of the
Oh,
Pentateuch,
that,
and they're
yeah, the hype.
pasted together. And
Uh-huh.
you're right, when they say Yahweh, that's one author. When they say Elohim, that's another author. And how do we know this? Well, we just assume it. And then so that actually
Yeah.
didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
But I liked reading Genesis. It was like
Mhm.
I remember reading this and thinking, oh wow, this is really profound. And these are, I saw them at the time as kind of archetypal symbols, but oh, maybe there's a literal meaning to this, because it sure makes sense with everything I'd experienced as far as,
Yeah.
evil and the fruit, the desire for communion with God and paradise. Um, so yeah, that, and then the experiences with like evil, right? And the temptations of evil led me to like open up the scriptures at some point. And I'd
Mhm.
had this Bible that I had gotten from a friend a couple years before, and I hadn't opened it up in a couple years, which I definitely should have. But yeah, I remember just reaching the end of the line with certain things that I was kind of going through emotionally at the time, and then dealing with trying to put together what the heck is happening in the world. The
Yeah.
world seemed more and more wicked, and it seemed like it was just going really quickly into further wickedness. And so I remember opening up the Bible to in the New Testament and like reading it with who's now my wife Jessica. And then like praying for the first time ever. I
Oh
just
wow.
it was like we were both crying because I'm bringing her along on this whole thing that I'm going through, and I'm reading all this stuff. I'm like, you have to read this book. You have to read like this is what's happening. And then
Yeah.
we met some people that had experiences with strange things, like possibly connected to ritual abuse and stuff like
Oh,
this. So we're just like, okay, this is real. To us, it became so real that there was absolute evil. So, I started looking through the New Testament, doing the Protestant thing where you just open it up and like look at verses out of context. But
yeah.
there's speaking is, oh, every two or more are gathered in my name. There I am. I'm like, here we go.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to tell my friends, like, oh, look at this, like God's real. This is all this stuff's going on. The world's going nuts. They're gonna put you in FEMA camps or whatever, what like various things that were happening that I thought were happening at the time. And so I was just, quarter life crisis, trying to figure out my place in the world,
Yeah.
freaked out by what's happening in the world,
Hmm.
hyperbolic at times with like my analysis of events. And I remember going to my friends, and they're all like, they're all at the last year at the university, and they're drinking and doing drugs, and they like to party. And these guys I used to live with, I remember going over there, this house I used to live in, but I had moved out with my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, because I knew that I wanted a real relationship. So
Yeah.
I come to the conclusion when I was like 20, I was like, the next like woman I'm with is I'm gonna marry her, because I didn't want to do the dating thing or anything anymore. I was sick of all that. And it actually ended up happening, thank God.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I go back to the house I used to live in with my buddies, and they're like shooting. They were literally shooting a Bible with um, a BB gun. They had a Bible
What?
there, and they were
Oh my.
shooting it in this house, right inside the house. They had a pellet gun. It's like a pump action rifle
Yeah.
pellet gun, and they're shooting this Bible. That's like
What?
that's the aesthetic that they're living in. I'm just
Oh
like,
my.
oh man. And I'm going to try to tell them, hey, I'm reading the Bible and I'm getting, this is
Yeah.
for real.
Yeah.
And they're just like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know, man. So yeah,
That's
that was a funny time. So I had this kind of general Protestant, we'll just read the Bible, it's true, and we'll figure it
yeah.
out. I hadn't read the entirety of the scriptures. I hadn't, of course, ever heard about any of traditional
Hmm.
Christianity. Knew
Yeah.
nothing about it. Just knew that I inherently rejected Roman Catholicism because that's like some pedo cult. I
Yeah.
just
Oh
didn't want to be a
yeah.
part of that.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was kind of my introduction to Christianity. Was just like, oh, open the Bible. Here I'm getting some answers. So there must be more here. But I didn't know how to define, well, it's a Christian, right?
Yeah.
Is Jesus God? That
Hmm.
wasn't even clear to me.
Yeah.
Like is Christ God or not? Or oh, are we all kind of potential Jesuses? Are we is Jesus just like a guy who fully actualized himself, like the Western
Yeah.
occultists said? So and I'd also read like Blavatsky and I think it was during this time I started reading a lot of like the Theosophists, not because I was interested in them and in joining their movement or anything, but because I wanted to understand like what the so-called elite are into,
Yeah.
right? So I, learned about the United Nations and how Alice Bailey and the Lucis Trust, the Lucifer Publishing Company, through the UN, was publishing all this stuff by Bailey and the Theosophy texts from Blavatsky. So I'm like reading these things, and I'm like trying to figure out how do I discern, well, what the heck is Christianity? I'm like, well, these
Yeah.
people are like satanic, and here's what they say, but like maybe some of the things they're saying is kind of true, right? How do I know?
Yeah.
How do I know that like Blavatsky's interpretation of the Jesus as some ascended master and part of the Great White Brotherhood or whatever is not real? I thought it's like, well, I don't know. I was
Yeah.
lost. I was in the wilderness.
Hmm.
So yeah, I spent years kind of, trying to figure out, well, who's Christ,
Hmm.
right? And I had never done, it's fun. I didn't even think to do research into where the Bible came from because at the time it's kind of like, well, yeah, most of history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
I'd studied history at the university, so I was just like very black pilled on the objectivity of historical analysis, and that's what I was looking for in studying history. And I realized like, oh, you just make up your exegetical lens for history. That's what I
Yeah.
realized in the university. It was like
True.
everyone's just winging it, you know? I mean, these
Yeah.
people are all just making up their worldview as they go along. So it's like that's cool. I could just do that, be like an academic, and teach people whatever my made up opinions are at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, then I reached the end of the line of that eventually, and just was really, really sick of the uncertainty on the exegesis of Scripture, the interpretation of Scripture. And I'd known people that call themselves Christian, Protestant Christian, and they were just they could say stuff that I would think, oh, that's completely contrary to what I'm seeing in the Bible, right? But there's no heresy in Protestantism. So like I could, who am I to say, oh
Yeah.
no, that's the wrong interpretation of that.
Hmm.
But like, oh whatever, man, whatever, bro, to each his own.
Yeah.
Just make it up as you go. And so I reached the end of the line with that. And then actually was exposed online to, I think, I'm pretty sure Jay Dyer was one of the
Oh,
first
really?
people that yeah, I think Jay might
Wow.
have been one of the first people I heard talk about Orthodoxy. And so I was like, oh, I got to look into this. I ended up getting a book from Father Seraphim Rose. Um, I got his book Nihilism, and I got his book Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. And when I read Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, it just all made sense to me. It was like, well,
Yeah.
wow,
I,
this.
I'm actually reading it
eh,
right now. It's a really good book. And yeah, and
Which, yeah, which
yeah.
chapter are you on?
Let's see. I'm on the um oh, the mono, or let's see. Oh, the new religious consciousness. But he, like, this book is really just prophetic. Like, so many people have read it and be like, wow, he's so vindicated. And he was from Santa Cruz too, right? Seraphim Rose.
He
Yeah.
did, yeah. He
Yeah.
gave some speeches in Santa Cruz. He was from San Diego,
Yeah.
and which I grew up in North County, San Diego. So, and then he went to Northern California,
Yeah.
and he gave one of that book, the God's Revelation of the Human Heart,
Oh, yeah.
was a transcript from a presentation he gave in Santa Cruz.
Yeah. So you start reading Seraphim Rose and Jay Dyer, and then it just kind of like clicks. You're like, this is what I've been looking for. The like certainty, like I connect with this. It finally makes sense. Or
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it took a while. It took a
Yeah.
while, but it was like,
Exactly.
okay, well, this is really interesting. Reading that book, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, it was just, he's writing that from an Orthodox perspective, and he doesn't break down and give you, a very in-depth view of Orthodox theology. It's like as an intro to Orthodoxy, I think for Protestants and people who have been exposed to all the New Age stuff or
Yeah.
Western occultism, which when I say New Age, I mean like Western occultism, right? Like, Blavatsky and all this stuff, and the Hermeticists, like that's just the New Age is just a mishmash of all this Western occultism with some Eastern philosophy thrown in
Yeah.
there.
Hmm.
So I think for me, it was so perfect because a lot of the things that I had seen and experienced and come to understand were demonic, but didn't understand exactly why always.
Yeah.
That book really it all added up to me. And he talked about the problems with the Pentecostal movement and
Hmm.
the charismatic, the Pentecostal, or what do you call it, charismatic revival
Yeah.
that you're seeing in the U.S. right now. So I'm just like, well, yeah, this is always what I despised about
Hmm.
Protestantism, and why, as soon as when I started reading the scriptures, I'm just like, oh no, I'm like a Christian. So like, what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Now I have to be cringe. So I,
Yeah.
it just yeah, it added up with for me.
Yeah.
So then from there, I started trying to understand a little bit more about the history and theology of the church, and everything that I read just felt it just like was like pure water. It was just like absolutely uh, pure and very. It just put things together for me. So I read like a little bit of
Yeah.
Saint John of Damascus, and then actually, well, I read like Vladimir Lossky, The
Oh.
Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church, which probably would have been better for me to have read other things before that.
Yeah.
But it took me, it was really dense, but
Hmm.
that led me to, I was like, well, I go, okay, what does this word mean? I'm going to have to look at this. And so, yeah, it just led me into deeper research. And then I was just basically convinced by the theological arguments, and then especially about the history of the church,
Hmm.
and then also the suffering of the new martyrs under the Bolsheviks. So,
Yeah.
and then Father Seraphim Rose's biography, that was another big one where it was that really. It's hard to find a copy of it right now, unfortunately, but his biography is great.
Yeah.
And so as from reading all that material, I was pretty much convinced. So
Hmm.
then it came down to, well, and this was about, I don't know, it was just a few years ago. My daughter had been born in 2012. Her daughter was born in 2012, and she was probably 6 or 7 when I started looking at this. And yeah, I got an Orthodox study Bible. We started doing the morning and evening prayers that were in the Orthodox study Bible.
Yeah.
Got like an Orthodox prayer book and just kind of started moving from there. But then the problem was there's no Orthodox parish anywhere near me.
Oh.
So we're living in a Roman Catholic country. We had moved down to Ecuador in 2010,
Hmm.
and so we're just like, man, are we gonna have to move? Are we gonna have to leave?
Yeah.
We didn't want that. It was just like we're looking online trying to figure out if there are any Orthodox in the country, and we'd heard that there was some Greek. There was like maybe a Greek Orthodox church, and I found somebody in Facebook, and I messaged them. I forget what it was. I don't know who this was. I forget who it was. I messaged this person. He's like, "Oh yeah, there is an Orthodox parish, but um, in the city called Quito, which is very far from where I live. There's an Orthodox parish in Quito, and then there's another guy who's called Celi, who calls himself Metropolitan Chrysostomos. And you got to watch out for him because he's like this crazy schismatic. He's like fake Orthodox, and
Oh.
he calls himself Orthodox. So I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense to me because I didn't really know about the all these weird schismatic groups
Yeah. Hmm.
out there. So, anyways, yeah, I couldn't find any Orthodox parish in the country that we live in, which is a very very small country.
Yeah.
And then talking to an online acquaintance who's a deacon, talking to Father Deacon Ananias,
Oh.
he asked me like, "Hey, were you ever able to find an Orthodox parish?" I'm like, no, man, this has been no father, and call him man, but no, this has been really hard. We're not able to find one. I don't think there's anybody in this country. I don't think there's a priest in this country. And he goes, "Oh, look at this. I found this website." And he sends me this link. I was just, wow, it was that easy for you. I wish I'd I wish I told you this two,
Yeah.
3 months ago when we were,
Yeah.
really seriously
Uh-huh.
looking. And he sends me this link to a website. It's just a single page, real simple page, and
Hmm.
this contact info for a priest. And hey, we ended up contacting him, and he was great. He was just we were speaking to him in Spanish, which is, second language. So my Spanish is definitely not nearly as proficient as English. And
Yeah.
speaking to him on WhatsApp via voice notes, and just asking him some questions and telling him, look, we really, we've been inquiring. We want to become Orthodox. And
Hmm.
he goes, after a few days of talking to him back and forth in voice notes, he's like, oh, by the way, I speak English. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, great.
Oh
And he's
my.
like, I will come visit you. And he takes an overnight bus,
Oh wow.
a 12-hour bus, just gets on a bus, comes to our house and blesses our home and brings us books and icons and hangs out for, I think it was like maybe a Friday, so it was a fasting day. We're, trying to give him, he drinks water and then we trying to offer him some food and stuff. No, 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 it's okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
And, didn't even eat anything, hangs out at our house after a 12-hour all-night bus ride, and then just goes, okay, I go now. I meet somebody in the city over here and jumps back on another bus. And then that night, I guess he took the overnight bus back to where he's from. So that
Hmm.
was we were just floored.
Yeah.
Wow, this is amazing. This priest, we talked to him on WhatsApp, comes to our home, blesses our home, gives us some spiritual advice on prayer and stuff, and then he's just like, okay, see you soon, and just leaves. What in the world? And one of the books he brought me, he brought us a few books. He brought us this book about the book by Father Seraphim Rose about Saint John of Shanghai and San Francisco,
Oh.
which you can't get now. It's been out of
Yeah.
print for years. So I was amazed with that. So this great book about Saint John, and then he brought me this other book that was the same book that I was already halfway through reading, and that was at the head of my bed. So Paul Mazansky's book on Orthodox dogmatic theology. So it was just
Yeah.
kind of amazing, and we really got along with him. And
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that was kind of where it was like undeniable. Well, okay, yeah, this is for us. This is what we want, you
Yeah.
know. And seeing like the selflessness of this priest who really was just embodying um,
Christ.
what you would have wanted,
Yeah.
yeah, what you would have wanted to see from a representative of Christ on earth.
Hmm.
And it was to us that was amazing. We were floored, and we're like, this is for us. Like we're all in. And
Yeah.
within a year of that, well, then within about a year, was it a year? Maybe a year and a few months, we were received in the church. We were baptized,
Oh,
which was
awesome.
almost 3 years ago. So yeah, about 3 years ago, we were finally received into the church. And before that, it was a several year experience of learning about Orthodoxy and shedding kind of the old baggage of, well, I can be the arbiter of truth and I
Yeah.
can figure it out for myself. Um,
Did you get
and yeah,
baptized by him? Or
yeah, we were baptized
that's
by him.
awesome. So it was,
Yeah,
yeah, it was just like a journey. It was a long journey, just coming closer and closer to Christ, and it worked out perfectly. That's a
yeah,
really awesome story.
yeah. But there were times when it was definitely messy. There were times
Yeah,
it was
no,
like,
everyone's got a
you know,
messy,
there were some
but
bloodbaths, but yeah,
yeah.
it was
But
awesome.
I felt like once I found Orthodoxy, it's like you're looking for that like like you're trying to get that thirst quenched. But when you finally like find Orthodoxy, it just like fulfills you in that way that something that you've always been looking for that you
Yeah, it
can't find.
challenges you too, right? It's
Yeah,
like the fulfillment, but then also the
that's just a
oh,
start. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's
Yeah, it's
like
like it's like, oh, I've found this. I think the first step was oh yeah, like this is the truth. Like it's all good. Like I'm there. We've got it. Like we could just, join the church and then it's like it's gonna be great. But it's
yeah,
also no,
that's just a
it's definitely a
start.
struggle.
Yeah,
And I'm a wuss, so it's not like it's not like I've dealt with great adversity or anything like
yeah.
that. But there have been struggles for sure,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's been amazing. There's nothing. I mean, it's what do we all want, right? We all want
Yeah,
God. We all want
hmm,
what's true,
yeah,
and it's so confusing to be out there in the world and the madness of the world that's just constantly trying to get us to degrade ourselves and
yeah,
to sell ourselves off physically and spiritually. And
yeah,
so, the lives of saints, to the proper interpretation of scripture
yeah.
and the
Proper.
sacraments, it's
Hmm.
like you start structuring your life around this and it changes everything. I mean, our
It does.
kids, it's been so amazing to be able to see our children and how they're like, they're so much more innocent than us. Their daughter's 10 and our son's 6, but like the way that the way they communicate with us and the things they say to us, it's like, oh wow, I wish I could think like you, um, without
Yeah,
the friction in between, because we've grew up in secular
yeah.
America and
Chaos
then
land.
surrounded
Yeah,
chaos, and Protestantism is a part of that. And
it is.
there are a lot of Protestants I love, but
Hmm.
I think Protestantism is is I don't know. I mean, Jay always says it calls it an atheist factory,
It
right?
is.
It's like the whole culture and the evangelical movement, all this, it just makes people atheists. All the kids I grew up with, whose parents were really into the mega church and they would go to Sandals or Harvest, um, all their kids grew up to be atheists
Yeah.
except one. The only guy that was the only childhood friend that I know that I'm certain is, still a Christian is now Orthodox.
Oh
And he goes to
wow.
Father Josiah Trenham's
That's
parish.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the only one out of all my close friends growing up who were good kids, better than I was at the time. I was always the one who was like, yeah, that's not real. Let's just have fun.
Yeah.
It's not like I was a total degenerate, but I was definitely more degenerate than a lot of my friends who at least had this general Protestantism, which, um, I was very hypocritically critical of, because I didn't have something better than I can't even say it,
Yeah.
than Protestantism to offer. I just had hedonism to fall back in.
Yeah.
And that's death.
It
It
is.
really destroys you.
Yeah. physical and spiritual death. And that kind of goes into the next point I want to talk about. We talked about you taking like the God pill, but what about like the meat pill? Because you know that's so important. Is like when and like did you, because you studied history, but for those who don't know, Tristan is really into nutrition and diet. So when did you start to realize that like the diets that were being promoted so much, especially in probably Santa Cruz, veganism was probably popular
Yeah.
a long time ago. So how was that like waking up to like getting into like I do intermittent fasting. That's really good. Intermittent fasting, and then you started doing keto, and then now you do carnivore. So how was that like?
Yeah, well, it's kind of out of necessity.
Yeah.
I wish it was an option, but for me, it was kind of like just dealing with chronic health issues since I was a kid, asthma, allergies, and then chronic pain. I had a couple injuries that were real bad. Like during my peak nihilism phase, I was kind of an adrenaline junkie, like I would like seek out really dangerous things. And I was really into skateboarding. So I would bomb hills in Santa Cruz. There are a lot of hills to bomb.
Yeah.
And I used to like to go through lights where there's cars and stuff. And I used to do stupid stuff. And I was bombing this hill. It wasn't that big on, I almost died a few times.
Oh
Like I
wow.
remember a few really close calls of almost having really bad accidents. But this time it was definitely the wake up call. Um, and I felt like I was invincible, and I was skating this hill,
Hmm.
and it had like really big gummy wheels that were real soft, and it just like you could go over little pebbles and stuff without
Yeah.
without hitting the floor. And there was a four-way stop sign, and
Yeah.
I didn't read it right, and I was just trying to go through this stop sign, and this car was going straight, and I'm coming down this hill, and I'm coming down this hill really fast. I don't know how fast, but pretty dang fast. And this car's pulling out from the stop sign, and I just hit it right on the fender. I just nailed it,
Oh.
going full speed, and hit my left hip. And I flew up in the air. The skateboard went under the wheel. It was broken in half. I flew up in the air and landed on the roof of this car, and
Wow.
and it was illegal to skate on the campus of University of California, Santa Cruz. And I had a bunch of skating tickets, and I couldn't really afford any more. So
Yeah.
I was just freaked out. I was like, no, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I pick up my broken skateboard and went to class, and I was really shook up. Cortisol, a lot of adrenaline, and I didn't really feel the pain right then. I was just like, oh, I'm fine. I'll be a little more careful.
Yeah.
Maybe I was being stupid, but I'm okay.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, soon after that, I was just in chronic pain, terrible back pain, headaches, couldn't sleep. I had a huge knot in my hip, like at the top of the glute, where the
Wow.
lower back meets the butt. And it was like it's like not like sciatica, but probably
Ooh.
not as painful as sciatica,
Yeah.
but constant, and then weird mobility. And I felt like I was walking totally crooked for years. It's funny, the skateboard that I had, it was I remember the exact skateboard, and I loved that. I loved this board, um, and it was like totally blasphemous. It was an image of it had a blue background, and it had an image of a Bible, a pack of cigarettes, and a revolver, and an American flag. So it's kind of this, mocking Americanism, and
Yeah.
that thing had broke in half. I thought that was kind of funny.
Wow. Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, I'd been injured and was in a lot of pain, and I was like, well, how the heck do I deal with this? I was going to chiropractors, and none of them could help. I would, seek out like pain pills, and it's just like that didn't help. Just made like the opioids make you feel really irritable.
Yeah.
So, I would just, just make me feel like crap. And,
Hmm.
thankfully I never got addicted because I knew a lot of kids who destroyed their lives with,
Yeah. Those can be
oxy
really
and stuff.
dangerous. Yeah.
They're awful. They're
Hmm.
absolutely awful. I mean, I probably torched my liver with all the pain pills, but I was just trying to figure out how to manage this pain.
Yeah.
And yeah, I met this guy. I remember meeting this guy, and he starts telling me about veganism. He's like, "Hey man, you should look at your diet." He didn't really frame it as vegan. He was like, "I'm raw, man. I don't even eat cooked foods. Like these cooked foods are destroying your health." And he's like, "Here's what I do." And he was funny, man. This guy was crazy. He and I really got along because he was just a total I don't know, he was just like a pirate. He had been, this guy had a whole crazy history. He ended up going to jail for robbing a bank. He robbed three
Oh
banks.
my God.
This guy was nuts.
Yeah.
He tried to get me to rob a bank with him.
Because he's a
I
vegan.
was like, he was, yeah, I mean, he was, well,
That's
he
what
was
it led him
vegan,
to.
but yeah, no, he was vegan. And also he was into the ethical veganism thing
Oh.
too, but he's cool to rob banks with a
Yeah.
revolver. He's fine with robbing a bank. So yeah, just very
Yeah.
strange guy. But you know, I'm whatever, 20 years old or something, 21 years old. It's like, oh yeah, this guy's like me. He's cool. He's a rebel.
Yeah.
So yeah, he ends up getting me interested. He like showed me how to make smoothies and stuff. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll drink more smoothies and I'll eat less junk food, eat less processed food. So, those are some of the good takeaways from that is
Yeah.
eating less processed food
Hmm.
um and so yeah, it was like kind of cursory interested in veganism and had been exposed to this guy who was onto the raw thing and he was kind of showing me about some supplements. So I'm like researching this stuff and experimenting on myself and um for like maybe almost a year and a half was kind of trying to cut out I was able to cut out all like the processed foods, but then I was like, well, yeah, maybe meat's not so good for us. Maybe we just need a little bit. Most of the vegans that I'd met were really weird. So I wasn't convinced by ethical veganism.
Yeah.
Wasn't even convinced by like dietary veganism because a lot of them seemed frail too.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I still somehow got sucked into like, trying it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was strange. So I was kind of more vegetarian, vegan, playing with like raw food stuff,
Hmm.
and quickly realized that that was not helping me. I got very underweight. Um, wasn't healing. My injuries weren't healing. I was just losing muscle mass around the injury, so it actually made the
Oh.
pain worse.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I'm trying to heal, strengthen the stuff around this injury and get my body to work correctly. And I'm having to go to the chiropractor several times a week because I'm getting so out of alignment and they're just in constant pain.
Hmm.
And and was introduced to like kind of the Weston Price stuff. And Weston A. Price he was an anthropologist and he actually started the American Dental Association. He was trying to figure out why Americans and British and like in the modern industrialized Western nations, why the dental health and physical health was so bad. And he made these observations that dental health is one of the first things to suffer when nutritional deficiencies happen in human beings. So what he did is
Oh.
he traveled in the 1930s and early 40s, all around all these different areas where people were still eating diets of locally produced foods. So he wasn't like I don't know, a lot of the paleo stuff is really cringe and stupid. It's like, oh bro, like our ancestors were cavemen,
Yeah.
dude, and they were just like they just did what they wanted and were so dominant and like, Liver King and all this stuff. That's super cringe and
Yeah.
fake and gay in my opinion. But the Weston Price is really overlooked as an anthropologist and as a guy who studied diet in depth. So he found that these people in like the Hebrides Islands in the Scottish Islands
Mm.
who weren't eating imported foods, that these like the Swiss in the Lochental Valley in Switzerland, who had very little contact with the outside world as far as trade goes. The only thing they traded for was salt.
Mm.
Um, they were living off of they had dairy cows and would make broths and have vegetables and so very little carbohydrate and high intake of animal fats is what he saw in a lot of these populations. And the populations that had access to a lot of tropical fruit, like he went to these Indonesian and Polynesian islands, their most prized foods were always fatty fish and shellfish and animal fats, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
they're these areas he believed that vegetarianism was healthy. He was like, well, I got to find like the most vegetarian, healthy
Society.
human
Yeah.
populations. And remember, this is the 1930s and 40s before, I mean, most of these populations are gone now. Like they're all assimilated into the
Yeah.
global trade structure where they're eating refined flour, they're eating, the refined and fortified grains, canned food, high sugar, I'm not saying sugar or glucose is bad, but like high processed food diet. and they're gone now. But he found that every one of these people, there were certain similarities. And the similarities were that they all gave great importance to animal foods. So coming into contact with some of his work and some of those ideas was really interesting. Yeah, I was still, it's funny, I was still convinced, like, yeah, meat, you don't need that much of it. Maybe you just need a little bit of meat. Our daughter was born in 2012 and she started getting dental issues.
Oh.
And we weren't like vegan at the time. We just kind of ate whatever we wanted. But we had a period of time with like maybe a year or 2 years before that, my wife and I were both kind of almost vegan-ish. We'd go sometimes weeks without having any meat, and then we just crave it so bad and eat it. And it wasn't an ethical thing. We just thought, oh, this is probably healthier and like detox or whatever, but it's delusional.
Yeah.
So what we found was that as soon as we started introducing a bunch of animal fats, like butter, full fat dairy, doing things like bone broth, eating foods like bone marrow, our daughter's teeth, which were her baby teeth, right? And she had what was called dental caries, which happens in a lot of kids. Most dentists will blame the mother for breastfeeding, which is completely insane because children have been breastfeeding forever. And, your great grandmommy wasn't having their breastfeeding baby's teeth brushed every 3 hours, right? Breast milk is not eroding children's teeth, but they'll blame the mother. Oh, you must fall asleep. You let the baby fall asleep on the breast. You let him fall asleep latched, and it's like just real strange gaslighting that you get from a lot of doctors. And coming in contact with some of the work of Weston A. Price, and then kind of revisiting that and implementing the principles that he taught, which were basically getting the fat-soluble vitamins in high levels in the diet through animal foods with a focus on fatty animal foods to get like vitamin A, D, K2. These are fat-soluble vitamins that you don't get from plants. And he postulated that these vitamins are crucial for skeletal structure development, central nervous structure development, and that if you don't have enough of these, you will suffer from poor dental health. Women will suffer from narrow birth canals, and this is all observed. Like the scientific literature vindicates him that people who are deficient in fat-soluble vitamins, women get narrow birth canals, have more difficulty in birth. The infamous British soy boy jaw, the jawless, crowded mouth of the notorious Brits. He said that this is very much dietarily related. And we found that when we started doing what Weston Price recommends in his book, which is called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, we found that her teeth got hard, right? Like before they were like crumbled. It broke our hearts because we had done everything we could to try to raise her healthy and try to shelter her from the world of that wants to destroy children. And we're like, Look at our kids' teeth. Our precious little child's baby teeth are having problems. What's going to happen when she gets her adult teeth? We're super worried. Anyways, her adult teeth came in totally normal. The dentin in those teeth that were seeing decay, it all hardened up. And our daughter loved at the time eating lots of fatty foods, broth, bone marrow. She loves like foods like liver, or at least at the time she did. She doesn't, cared for it too much because she probably had a lot when she was a kid.
Did this also help with your chronic pain? Because I've heard the
I forgot about that.
the carnivore diet. It helps a lot of people with like gut issues too. Like it's just kind of like a magic, or like it can help a lot of different things. So did it help you with your chronic pain?
That's that's what happened to me. Was I had kind of chronic digestive issues since I was a kid, chronic pain and inflammation issues in the body, and also just kind of symptoms of insulin resistance. Like I definitely was a candy addict as a kid, and I didn't take care of myself at all in my younger years. I would eat whatever felt good, which was always just tons of sugar, junk food, pastries, and
chemicals.
It wasn't. Just processed crap. So I was raised on breakfast cereal and Costco donuts and stuff. So the chronic pain that I had, I kind of mashed up those two different threads. Thanks for helping me land this out of control aircraft. But I'd hit a wall with the trying to be more plant-based or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And my diet ended up becoming pretty elemental to just maintain like normalcy as far as digestion goes without getting too graphic. And so kind of these chronic digestive issues that I had had off and on since I was a kid at times got really bad. So I ended up finding that, you know, a diet of just like unrefined foods, focusing on good quality meat and, you know, some fruit, honey, and you know, avoiding for the most part grains. Like I found grains, I can't handle beans and legumes. Something happened at some point where I just like every time I ate them, I would get like an allergic reaction. So I started realizing I've got some serious allergic reactions to a lot of foods,
Yeah.
and you know, that led me to experimenting with, you know, kind of like more Weston A. Price style diet, and then I heard about keto. I heard about keto around 2013 or so, 2012 or 13, I forget when it was. And it wasn't very well known, but I'd read about it as a, you know, treatment for neurological issues in children.
Oh
People,
wow.
children who have, yeah, children who have epilepsy, untreatable epilepsy, would get complete remission of their epileptic seizures if they maintain stable blood sugar on a ketogenic diet in that ketogenic state. So then I also heard that it would just generally help to reduce inflammation in the brain and in the rest of the body as well. So started experimenting with this and was just blown away by the results I got. Felt fantastic and loved it. Actually started doing stuff on YouTube about this around 2014,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like one of the early, we kind of, you know, we were kind of providing information on keto and this type of diet right when it started blowing up. So,
Yeah.
you know, the
You're a
channel kind of blew
pioneer.
up. And yeah, kind of
Yeah.
2014, 15, really got a lot of traction. And then, yeah, I remember when like Rogan got on keto back in the day, and like him talking about it boosted the whole niche significantly.
Yeah.
And I mean, now it's just like saturated, super mainstream now. You
Yeah.
can't even find my channel in the algorithm now because it's kind of, you know, we're on the naughty list nowadays. But you know, back then it was a different world on YouTube. It was like before monetization.
Yeah.
So you know, to get 1,000 views in a week back then for me was like, oh wow, I can't believe I got 1,000 views on this one video in a week.
Yeah.
It was like I would be amazed. So yeah, I just kind of slowly built the channel there, and then you know, I'd still had certain issues with digestion
Mm-hmm.
that I never seemed to resolve, and I ended up realizing that like the more vegetables I ate, the worse it would get. So um, I had talked to somebody and interviewed Andrew Scarborough on my channel, and he had a brain tumor, and he was using he had a astrocytoma. Is astrocytoma, or I think it was astro, not a glioblastoma. He had an astrocytoma um, brain tumor, several brain tumors, and he had them removed. And he used the keto diet, but he found that keto wasn't enough. He had to completely avoid almost all plants and fiber in order to keep his brain chemistry to where he wasn't getting seizures.
Oh wow.
And so being exposed to him and being friends with him online, he was doing like a full carnivore diet kind of
Yeah.
before people started calling it a carnivore diet. And I forget how the whole carnivore thing blew up, but we were kind of, you know, interviewing people within the niche, and that part of it really started becoming a focus. I think Sean Baker really kind of blew it up. He was like, "Hey, I'm this 50-something-year-old jacked super athlete who's never taken steroids, and I just eat meat, and I'm totally fine. It took care of a lot of my chronic pain and things that I was dealing with." That was his story. So that whole niche really started exploding. So anyways, I had found that I could not digest fiber. Most vegetables, legumes, grains, like a little bit of wheat now and then is fine, but there's a threshold where it would just like my health would kind of would tank in general, and it would be kind of catastrophic. Like it would be really bad. You know, I mean, there was a time when my digestion got so bad, I had lost. I mean, I was down like under 140 pounds, like 130 something
Oh,
pounds.
wow.
I'd lost like 30 pounds, and yeah, and I was just like, I was so
Yeah.
sick, and I had to just fast because everything I ate would throw me into a.
Yeah.
I'd taken antibiotics. Like I'd gone to traditional doctors, taken antibiotics. They made it worse, right? So I went through some rounds of antibiotics, and then like, you know, you reach a point where it's like, okay, I got to go to a traditional doctor. You go, you get some tests and stuff done. They throw you on antibiotics. And what happened was I had a really bad allergic reaction to an antibiotic that I was given.
Oh.
So I look up this antibiotic that I had taken, and I'm seeing stories of people say, "Oh yeah, after I took this antibiotic, my life was never the same. I have neurological issues now. I
Oh
can't
my gosh.
digest anything, and I just want to." People are like, "I just want to die." Like literally, people were saying like it made me suicidal.
Wow.
And I took 2 days of this antibiotic, and I'm just like, I literally felt like I was gonna die. I felt in my bones, like
Whoa.
pain in my. You know when you get a real bad flu or something, your
Yeah.
bones ache. It was like
Yeah.
that, but at a level I'd never experienced before. And I had cold sweats and was shaking at night. And I remember telling my wife, like, I think something really bad is happening in my body. Like, I'm scared right now.
That's
And
scary.
I threw those away. I was like, there's no way I'm taking these
Yeah.
antibiotics again.
Uh-huh.
So at that point, I was just kind of like, thinking about Andrew Scarborough. I was like, well, if this could be the last thing to try would be to just eat meat. And
Yeah.
so from like having, these kind of chronic digestive issues where everything seems to irritate the gut, like realize if I just stick to eating meat, um, and then started experimenting with other foods and found that some foods I was more sensitive to, some not so sensitive to. But the baseline became just, well, if I just eat meat, this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So I found that, a diet that's based on like meat, raw milk
Mhm.
was always great. So,
So what
started
do you
drinking raw
eat?
milk.
What do you eat in like a week normally? Like, do you
Well, like on a normal week, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, if it's not like a fasting period,
Hmm.
right? If it's not a fasting period, my diet basically nowadays, I don't really look at food as entertainment anymore.
Yeah.
Food is good, food's enjoyable,
Hmm.
right?
It's fuel.
But for me, it's kind of just like it's fuel.
Yeah.
If I can function without getting sick, without having chronic pain, and without being thrown into being thrown to the bathroom 20 times a day, then like that's what I'm gonna eat, and I'll do that to avoid. I'll bypass all the enjoyable foods that I used to love, in order to just be able to live my life and not be sick. So yeah,
Yeah.
I diet right now during non-fasting periods is basically raw milk, dairy, right? Raw cheese. We make cheese. We have
Oh
cows, and
wow.
so we have our own cows and we have our own milk. So we get fresh milk all the time. So raw milk, raw cheese, beef, pork, mutton, and I mean, I can eat chicken, duck, and any fowl, but we don't we don't really raise chickens for meat. We have ducks, but I
Yeah.
don't know. We don't eat them often. So yeah, basically just locally produced animal foods.
Mm.
We have bees. We have our own honey. We have our own beehives. So yeah, like raw milk, honey, and meat is
Wow.
kind of what I stick to, and it keeps things working. And
Yeah.
for me, it's enjoyable too. It's like, meat, milk, uh, eggs,
Mm.
cheese. I don't do well with eggs. I'm kind of an allergy to egg whites, which a lot of people have an allergy to egg whites, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's an ingredient in some of those happy, healthy, safe, and effective things that all of us took many of when we were a kid, and that creates it's theoretically that could create a strong immune reaction to those egg whites. So the albumin in eggs, I don't do well with, but I can do egg yolks.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you put any
yeah.
sauces or anything, or do you just use like the honey and like all just natural, locally sourced stuff?
Well, like our kids, they eat a complete, very varied diet. They don't have sensitivities like I got.
Yeah.
They seem to not do well with oats. Like there are certain foods where like you see there's some allergic reaction, but thank God they don't have the same level of, kind of food allergies that I have.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, we do. I'm really simple. I just eat, I'll eat ground beef,
Hmm.
it, burger patties without a bun, with some cheese melted on them, and drink some milk. And for me, that's fine. But I enjoy, some sauces and stuff like that. We put
Yeah.
out a cookbook in 2018 or 19, a carnivore cookbook, and there are a
Oh.
bunch of great recipes in there because my wife, she's really good at food prep and stuff like that, and she's a great chef. I'm real simple. Like
Yeah.
I just like, hey, make whatever you're gonna make, and I'll eat that. So we'll do roasts and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And when we have friends over, definitely mix it up a little bit and get a little bit more fancy.
Hmm.
But me personally, I don't care. Like to me, it's just a steak, or burger patties with salt and some milk, and then mix in some honey with some yogurt or something, or just eat some honey straight
Yeah.
if I need to. I'm just it's like pure pragmatic, just looking at food as fuel for me.
Yeah.
But I do like it. I
Mhm.
just like I eat simply and kind
Yeah.
of yeah, I eat very boring.
Yeah. So what are you doing during the fasting periods then? Like, is that pretty tough?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, definitely. I remember when we first became Orthodox, like trying to. I mean, first of all, just talk to your spiritual father about
Oh
fasting,
yeah.
right? That's
Hmm.
it's like so.
Yeah.
Work with our spiritual father and just keep it as simple as possible. But yeah, definitely can't handle a lot of grain. I can do a little bit of bread here and there,
Hmm.
but yeah, when usually in fasting periods, I'll just go really simple and it depends, right? Now I've had certain fasts where I kind of tried to just, well, let's see what I can handle and just start eating,
Yeah.
normal fasting foods and had had very bad results as far as health goes. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So.
basically,
Uh-huh.
work with my spiritual father and during some of the fasts, it might look like just some milk in the morning with like a piece of cheese and then in the evening the same.
Yeah.
So like
Hmm.
just some milk and cheese is usually most days. Actually, the last couple of weeks, it's kind of been how it's been.
Yeah.
Little milk and some cheese.
Uh-huh. So knowing all this, knowing like kind of the good of like the carnivore diet and like why are they promoting veganism so much and like, eating
Yeah.
bugs and like I think you've done a really good job on your channel kind of transitioning like knowing your knowledge about nutrition for this like kind of like global agenda that's going on that you talk about so much. So like for those who don't know what's going on, like why is like veganism and all this stuff being pushed so much and now like in the Netherlands like they're getting little kids to eat bugs and like
Yeah.
I mean and you talked about in your most recent video that like this diet it can it literally makes you weak, it can cause depression, so why is this being promoted?
It makes you weak and causes depression. No, I think,
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of different factors that play into this. One of them being there's economic reasons would be the most obvious that, most people who are maybe not as well versed in geopolitics and history as you are, maybe that would be the best way to explain it to some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's an economic incentive when you get people on a primarily so-called plant-based diet. They are reliant on imported processed foods. So we've got this global structure of food production that's been vertically integrated by huge transnational corporations like Bayer Monsanto, like Cargill, Syngenta, these big GMO grain conglomerates
Yeah.
own not just the grain trade, but the patents on the genes in those grains are owned by, big biotech pharma corporations. Getting people on a plant-based diet where they're reliant on these monocrops like peas for the pea protein isolate, which they tried to push a couple years ago. That's just, completely toxic to the body. Kills dogs. You put that in dog food, you put that pea protein isolate in dog food, it literally kills
Oh my
them. It's
gosh.
terrible for their kidneys. But oh no, you guys can eat it. You guys are fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are profitable and vertically integrated monocultures that also result in the destruction of rural people, right?
Hmm.
So you've got this consolidation of the agriculture production in most of the world that's happened over the last few decades really started with huge influxes of money from the Rockefeller Foundation. Harvard was instrumental in bringing about the genetic modification of foods and the normalization of what was called BT corn, the Monsanto corn that would produce that was resistant to Roundup and that could grow in an environment where tons of Roundup is used, right? And what Roundup does is it actually chelates the soil and blocks the uptake of minerals into plants. It blocks the uptake of minerals like manganese into these plants that need to pull those minerals out of the soil. And live bacteria in the soil are responsible for the communication of these minerals into the roots of the plant and the bringing those up into the plant matter so that you can have this the leafy green growth and eventually the grains that get produced. When you spray Roundup all over the place, you destroy the biome of the soil, and the soil is living. There are billions and billions of of organisms, as what's his face, Carl Sagan would say, there are all these organisms, microorganisms, and fungal networks that are required. It's a living ecosystem in the soil. There's a mycological environment of fungus. There's a bacterial environment of bacteria, and then there's an animal environment there as well of these insects like dung beetles and worms that help to create
Yeah.
the living environment that plants grow out of. When you intervene with something like Roundup, you block the uptake of minerals into the plant. You completely kill and turn to dust this valuable topsoil that we have. That takes hundreds of years sometimes to build good topsoil. Soil is really difficult to build, and to do it organically, to do that without animal input is impossible. But this is what they've done: is they've removed animals from the farming. They've removed and separated plant and animal agriculture and created these quarantine areas where you have these animals that are finished on grain way too young. I'm not against finishing animals on grain, but it's like they're sending them to these lots at 6 months old, and they're just feeding them day and night grain, and they have to give them antibiotics because there's only a certain amount of grain you can give a ruminant animal. And so now you've got all these grain-fed cows, and their feces, which would normally be used as one of the best fertilizers in the world.
Yeah.
The fertilizer, yeah, the manure is just, it becomes runoff. It becomes a toxic byproduct, right? And then they're using chemical fertilizers, and the NPK fertilizers that they're spraying all over these crops help to create dead zones in the ocean too. So you have this effect of just a wiping out of the ecological framework
Yeah.
for growing organic food that's happened. And that's really profitable, but it's really destructive, right? So the fake environmental movement now is so focused on, it's basically just weaponized against human beings, right?
Yeah.
The environmental movement has now just become a depopulation movement, and all they're doing is spreading the depopulation rhetoric. They've replaced the word depopulation, which went out of favor because it's a bit obvious, and they use climate change, global warming, and CO2 that you exhale is destroying the earth, while completely bypassing and not even paying attention to all these chemical fertilizers that are being used, and the destructive chemical-based agriculture that they've got. But it's funny, but now you see lip service being paid by the UN and by these technocrats as they say, well, yeah, look, all these fertilizers are real bad. And then these populations that are completely dependent on these fertilizers, these rural populations who are dependent on big IMF loans and loans from big banks to produce all this food using this industrial model, now all of a sudden they say, well, now you have fertilizer quotas and you can't get fertilizer. Right. So then they intentionally put these farmers out of business in places like the Netherlands, these are farmers who were kind of forced into this system economically. They could have fought back. I'm not saying they don't have human will. I wish that there was a pushback, but hey, I wasn't farming at the time. I can't judge, right? These people got duped into this chemical dependence, and now the farmers are being told, oh yeah, by the way, you can't use fertilizer anymore. It's bad for global warming. So we're going to remove your ability and limit your ability to use fertilizer and pesticides that they're dependent on.
Yeah.
So they're creating this strange food crisis situation, and basically gaslighting us into thinking that it's cows burping and cows farts that are making the earth hot and making the weather change. And if you guys would all just eat the kibble, eat our industrial soy slop, then everything will be fine and happy. So Mommy Earth will be so happy. Mommy Earth is sad, and she's really bummed out, and she's not just sad, she's mad, right? Everything that happens is because there's too many people, and you guys don't want to stop eating meat. You guys want to be bigots and live out in the mountains, whereas if you would just move into a smart city, give up your private vehicles, right, and live in a social credit system where you receive your kibble rations in return for good behavior, then Mommy Earth, she'll be happy again. She'll stop crying. So it's like there's a huge scam going
Yeah.
on that has economic incentives. There's an ideological factor.
Hmm.
There is an antinatalist, an anti-human factor that is underlying that ideological thing. And really, it's what we're looking at is food is a weapon of warfare,
It
right? I mean,
is.
that's as simple as you can make it. And
Hmm.
Kissinger famously said to a journalist that you control oil, you control the nations, you control food, you control the people.
Yeah.
Um, and that's definitely what we're seeing. And when you
Hmm.
read guys like, you look at guys like George Monbiot, he's this spoiled brat British guy who's probably never worked a real job in his life, has daddy issues and hates where he came from. He's openly advocating for the complete erasure of rural people and the rewilding of that land that farmers use because he says that farming is the worst thing in the world and that's what's causing climate change. The number one driver of climate change is just farming, right? So it's just open genocidal rhetoric
Yeah.
against rural people and against everybody because
Hmm.
we all depend on farms for food. And the sad reality is at this point, right now, we actually all depend on this chemical agriculture model that has been allowed to scale uh, so
Yeah.
huge and swallow up so much of the world's resources economically and then, physically that if they just pull the plug on this, we would see mass starvation. Right, so they're creating this dependence on heavy machinery being required for the production of food, and removing people's ability to grow food themselves. I mean, just a few decades ago, most people got their eggs from their own chickens, from their own
Yeah.
backyards. Right. I mean, before World War II, we didn't see this mechanization and this industrialization of the food supply. It has accelerated significantly since the 1950s and during World War II, it really kick-started. And it is what we're seeing here is the consolidation of resources, of economic power, and the destruction of a way of life that is very viable, right? The agrarian way of life is healthy at even an ecological level, but also spiritually,
Yeah.
and for communities, right? To know your neighbors, to know where your food comes from, and to not be poisoning ourselves with these awful things like glyphosate that destroys our gut, that makes children autistic, that is known to cause cancer, has been proven in a court of law to cause cancer. Um, not being dependent on these foods is is obviously a good thing. So, yeah, they want you dependent on the kibble. They don't want you to be able to produce your own foods locally. And if you want to live off of your own land, not everybody has to. I'm not saying that everybody should, want to or should, right? I have no problem. It's not like I don't think cities shouldn't exist or anything like that. But if you want to live off of your own land and live in a rural area, um, and not be dependent on the industrial food system, guess what? You're going to have to be producing animal foods because the only place you can get bioavailable and easily digestible protein and fat and the fat soluble vitamins that we need, right? Vitamin D, vitamin A, the retinol form of vitamin A, vitamin K2. These are fat soluble vitamins that are found in animal fat.
Hmm.
And you can live off of your own land with cows, sheep, chickens,
Yeah.
right? But you can't live off of your own land if you're eating a vegan diet. Vegetarian you can
Hmm.
because you have
That's true.
eggs,
Yeah.
dairy and stuff. You can live on a vegetarian diet and be very healthy. Uh, Definitely need some meat. And there's never been a healthy population that has completely omitted all animal foods from their diet, right? I mean, Orthodox monks who don't actually eat meat, like live on Mount Athos, they're regularly eating shellfish,
Hmm.
right? They eat huge amounts of shellfish and seafood,
Yeah.
and so the uh, the gaslighting of the population into thinking that animal foods are destroying your health and destroying the environment is most definitely strategic, economic, and ideological, and really dangerous for our health and
It
for
is.
the future of our kids.
Yeah. But it's not completely black pilled. Like you've taken into your own hands, like having your own farm, and like people can still do this by, trying to get their meats locally, trying to get everything that their food, just getting more in touch with your local economy. So you think, do you
Yeah.
think there still is hope in like taking it in your own hands by
Well,
controlling
absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
yeah. I'm
yeah,
sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
You got me all excited there for this one because it's yeah,
yeah,
man. We've got to do this, and this has been happening. I mean, before 2020 and everything was locked down, and the economy rapidly accelerated this destruction of the farming system with the lockdowns and everything. Before that, you were seeing farmers markets were becoming problematically big, right? Farmers
yeah,
markets they were demonizing them. You remember the articles? I mean, you saw those articles they would publish every few months from like 2016 to 2018, 19, where it's like farmers markets have a white supremacy problem. It's like
yeah.
they these people who are invested in this vertical integration system definitely see local food production and the rise of demand for organic foods and the rise of the demand. The American consumer has wanted GMO foods to be labeled for a long time. If you were to poll the American citizens and decide using that poll whether or not GMO foods would be labeled mandatorily, it would be like 90%
Yeah.
guaranteed would say, yes, we want GMOs labeled. But these lobbyists, big pharma, big ag, and biotech are obsessively battling against this and they hate small local food production, right? Their dream is to consolidate everything, vertically integrate everything, and the solution to this is local food production. The
Hmm.
solution to this, I mean, a solution to this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's the underlying root cause of this is the fall of man,
Yeah.
man's
Yeah. Demonic.
in the insatiable desire, so
Yeah.
you're not gonna trample down death by going to the farmer's market, right? The ultimate solution to this is Christ.
Yeah.
But like the agrarian life and agrarian economics are completely viable,
Hmm.
and simply implementing this and supporting the framework that's already there of local food production. Like there's websites such as eatwild.com. That one's
Yeah.
really good. Eatwild.com is great for getting in touch with local farmers and getting locally produced foods from those farms directly. Realmilk.com, if you live in the US, realmilk.com is a fantastic website for getting raw milk and getting in touch with raw milk producers. So, yeah, that's the answer to not just the economic problems of what's happening with the destruction of the food supply, but a lot of our health problems is
Hmm.
simply getting locally produced plant and animal foods from local farmers. Is actually really simple, but
Yeah.
they're under attack. You got to
Hmm.
understand they are under attack, and it's economically difficult for them to stay viable, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to buy locally produced quality foods, yes, you will pay more for them than you are going to pay if you go to Costco, and so it can be difficult for a lot of people. I'm not saying like, feel bad if you buy your food from Costco, but if
Yeah.
you're supporting local food producers, yes, it might be more expensive, but when you consider, the detrimental health effects long term and how much we'd spend on medical bills by continuing to eat a lot of processed foods with all these preservatives, these carcinogens in the packaging and the preservatives and the production methods and all these GMO crops that are put in there, like long term, probably end up saving money on medical bills.
Exactly. Like our entire economy is so focused on just short-term thinking, but if we just think long-term and like all of these other benefits that we don't think about in the short term, it would be really good. And just like,
This is the problem with capitalism and communism are both
yeah,
equally problematic. Right? I mean, Father George Calcio said that, in modern liberal democracy, the temptations are different, and it's like I forget exactly how he said it, but it's like the comforts um, of the West he saw as in many ways more dangerous than the persecutions under communism, because communism made martyrs, right?
yeah,
Whereas the decadent lifestyle that we have available to us makes it so easy for us to blind ourselves to the reality of what we're doing to our children by raising them in this secular world, what we're doing to I mean our communities by buying into the psyops of self-destructive behavior and
hmm,
allowing the destructive behaviors at the destruction of family, the destruction of healthy human sexuality, this the the detriment of that is is really apparent. So yeah, I think we gotta
Yeah.
we gotta look to building up our local economic situation, and that's that might take some sacrifice. And I'm not saying like yeah, it's not like you're gonna achieve theosis by going to the farmer's market or anything like that. It's
But
do what
it's
you got to do. But
it's a start. I think that's a good place to end it is, get involved in your local farmers market. Really just get involved in your local community, your local church community, get locally sourced food. Go follow Tristan. He's got great content. Do you have any final words before we end it?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
the channel Tristan Haggard. It's at Tristan Haggard on YouTube now that they have the at system. Um, you could find me on Twitter. Although wait, Tristan Haggard on Twitter is long dead, and I forget my new Twitter handle. But yeah, you can find me over there. You can find me on Instagram. It's at Primal Edge Health over on Instagram. And yeah, man, I really appreciate you having me on. And think I said this before you started recording, but I really enjoy your channel quite a bit, man. You do a great job with your edits, and everybody make sure to share Kyle's videos here. I think he does really awesome short format, to the point videos.
Yeah.
And I love the editing style, and I'm just really happy to see like the exposure that your videos get. Like I'm stoked to see how quickly the channel is growing.
Yeah.
And like the views that these videos are getting really show that the young whippersnappers are on the internets with their internet machines, and their smart phones are enjoying they like your Zoomer humor and your approach. And I love to see that so many people in so many like younger people are coming to the church and embracing tradition, and rejecting the degeneracy of the world, and
Yeah.
rejecting the world in general.
Yeah, that's why I want to expose them to like not just like Orthodoxy, but also all the other good things, like channels like yours where it's nutrition from like an Orthodox perspective. Like that is so important. And I mean I'd love to have you on again sometime, but yep, that's the end of it. Thank you. God bless.